Okay, so we're at 3:01 and it's Monday, May 7, 2018, for the meeting of the Architectural Advisory Committee. We ask everyone to silence your cell phones. And Planning Director, if we can have roll call.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Member Dosey, Member Jakeway, Member Lockyer,
Here.
Member McCoy,
Present.
Member Rotman is excused, Member Payline, Vice Chair Cassidy,
Here.
Chair Song.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have any revisions to the agenda for today?
Madam Chair, if we might have the report on the posting of the agenda
Oh,
before we
I'm
get
so
into. The agenda was posted on Wednesday, May the 2nd. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law.
Thank you very much. Okay, does anyone have any revisions to the agenda? I would like to move item under new business 4, Gordon Xerox for a minor architectural approval to consent calendar. And
Support that. Is that a motion? I guess.
yeah, we need a motion and we need a second.
I can move, we move it to the consent calendar.
Tom,
Second.
you?
Just need a vote.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Okay, since this is a public meeting audience, members are permitted to comment on any issues that's within this committee's purview. Comments on an item appearing on today's agenda are made at the beginning of the item when the item is presented. If you want to speak on an item that is not on today's agenda, you may do so now. I believe everybody here is case related, so at this point, we're going to go with the meeting minutes from the last meeting. Any revisions or comments?
Yes.
Yes, Member Tom.
Under item 3, I made a comment that they chose to set the siding of the house so that it's looking directly at the lot next door, and wanted to put in the record that they should not be able to complain about a house being on the lot next door blocking their view.
That's right, I remember that comment.
Just to verify, let's see, on item number 3 and on page 3.
Paragraph 4, Member Tom.
Well, that was questioning the active wash. I had a different comment about the siding of the house and how it would captured their views.
And that wasn't incorporated at all in here?
Not that I can understand.
Okay.
So let me just make a note. Okay, and then we'll go back and just verify that language on the tape. Thank you very much.
Hey, other comments or revisions? Okay, let's, is there a motion to accept the meeting minutes with the correction that was mentioned?
And just a reminder that you have moved item 4 to the consent calendar, so you'll be approving the minutes and item number 4 together with the change as noted by Member Jakeway to the minutes.
Thank you. Director Flynn, do we have a motion to accept the calendar as well as the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, all those, does
Second.
anyone second? Thank you. Member John, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to new business. Item number 2, GML Inc. on behalf of the Firebird Estate Homeowners Association for minor architectural review approval to alter an existing landscape area. Staff report, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The application in front of you is a proposed landscape conversion project for the Firebird Estates condominium complex located at 2033 East Ramon Road. This is the area view of the complex, and the area within the red boundary line is the Firebird Estates condo complex. The project site is the area that's highlighted red, as you see, and located at the southeast and the southwest corners of the complex. The proposed project is a second phase of a turf conversion project, which the HOA initiated in 2016. And this is the phase 1 project area, which was reviewed and approved in 2016. And then also the attachment 4 of the report includes what was previously approved. And this is a phase 2, which you will be reviewing today. These images are to show the existing conditions of the project site. As you see, it consists of an extensive open turf area and olive trees and oleander and bougainvillea hedges adjacent to the building elevations. This is a proposed landscape design for the southeast corner of the project site. The proposed design implements distinctive design elements that were observed in the phase 1 area. And these details include the placement of 3 blue parverde trees in the central section of the main planting area, which will be parallel to the building elevations, and a row of yellow bells in the background. Native plants will fill in the space between the parverde trees in the lateral connection, and the functions as a bridge between the yellow bells in the rear and the low-profile plants that are located near the outer edge of the planting beds. And then also the plan proposes the use of brimstone decomposed granite for the open areas and installation of a layer of La Cresta crushed rocks at the edge of each planting area. And then also the design includes a placement of La Cresta boulders, which is going to range from 2 feet to 2.5 feet in diameter, and embellish the edge of the La Cresta crushed rock layer. And the same design principle will be applied to the southwest corner of the complex as well. After the implementation of the proposed design, the site is going to have an appearance that's similar to the phase 1. This image is to show what the site looks like in the phase 1 area. Just to show you a little bit more in details. But the same design principle will be applied in the phase 2 project area. The proposed project is consistent with the Palm Springs zoning code section 8.60.660, water efficient landscaping, and also incorporates design elements that are recommended in the design guidelines. Although the project proposes design materials that are being implemented in other area of the project site, at the complex, staff finds that the minor alterations to the design are desirable to improve the overall design compositions, as discussed in this report. And the design issues that the staff is concerned about is the location of the Mediterranean farm farms in the corner cutback areas, also the lack of diversity in the size for the proposed boulders, and the solitary and ambiguous placement of certain plant materials, and then also the visual consistency and the connectivity between the main planting area and the parkways. And in the report, staff included recommended conditions of approval for the committee to review. The staff and applicants were both available to answer any questions you may have, and this concludes the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Noriko. Questions for staff? Member Kenny.
Thank you, Noriko. The one question I have is and maybe the applicant will be able to clarify on this, the decomposed granite that's being proposed is called brimstone, and it appears to be a much darker color than that was used on the phase 1 part of the project. Is that accurate? Or should I ask the applicant when they come up?
Yes, the applicant will be able to respond to the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Elvis Aranda, and I'm with Grandmark Landscape. It is brimstone. It seems to be that when they harvest the actual color itself from the quarry, it comes in different tones, but it's brimstone that was used previously on the first phase and that we're going to use in the second phase. It will lighten up slightly when we do apply the actual material into where it's designated and the sun gets sun exposure to it.
Mr. Elvis, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a chance to review the staff comments as far as your design goes?
I did not get a chance to review those comments. I did receive several emails because we've been trying to apply for a lengthy period of time, and I did not receive anything in conjunction. I did stop by several times to ask Ms. Noriko if anything that we need to do on our behalf to make the corrections or make anything more easier for you guys for clarity.
Did you have a presentation that you'd like to add, or there were issues about the Mediterranean fan palms at the corners, that they were clusters right at the corner? If you can go back to Exhibit 1 of 2. So you have, yes, so you have them cluster on the very top corner,
Correct.
and then you have also the same thing on the previous
That
by
is correct.
Camino Paracela. Yeah.
Would you like to see something a little bit different in the scope of layout?
If we said yes, what would be your proposal?
I would actually put them in an area where it's a little bit more viable in space. I don't think I'd go any different, defer too far away from where they're really at, just in an area where they can actually grow in a little bit better. We were actually anticipating to have them there as a focal point. It looked good, it flows good. With them maturing, I think that would be something that would look good in that area for the homeowners. Looking out into the street, it'd take a different perspective opposed to seeing it from street side in also. So you would have to look at them on both ends to kind of see what I'm talking about.
Okay, can you clarify that a little more? Because I'm not sure if you're saying that you are going to relocate them or you're going to keep them because that looks better from the inside out.
So our anticipation was to kind of mimic what was already done in the first phase. So we anticipate leaving it the way it was. That's how we drew it out in the plan. But if it comes down for us to move them so we can get approval to an area where it'll make more sense, viable to you guys, and also not just myself, but to the actual HOA, I would like to kind of meet somewhere in the middle so we can appease you guys and appease the people that I'm working for too.
Okay. Would you like to say something else to add to Noriko's presentation, or are you ready for our questions?
I think the questions, I'm ready for the questions.
Okay. Questions for the applicant, starting with Member Steve.
I was just concerned on the Mexican fan palms. That's not a corner. Those aren't on a corner. That's an inside. It's kind of confusing on the plan, but I'm just making sure that they're not on the corner.
It is kind of confusing because you have to reflect back and see the pictures too to see how the layout is. That is an actual street. That's a street corner on the far left, and the med palms are a little bit further up. So you would see those a little bit more towards the inside of the community opposed to the street side.
So it's right. So it's not. They're not on a. The fan palms aren't on a corner setback. All right. They don't. It's not a setback issue for the corner visibility, right?
There's
Noriko, can you help us
It's on
on
the
this?
inside edge. Okay. I
Yes,
think I've got it.
the cluster of palms that you see on this site plan towards the top, those are actually existing Mexican fan palms. So the Mediterranean fan palm is actually located at the corner, I should say left,
Oh,
lower
it's the
left
three
side.
at the bottom,
Right,
bottom
correct.
corner? Oh,
Yes.
got it. Okay. Right.
I believe that the area that you're looking at now, where the three med palms are at, that is a private road. It is adjacent to a main road and a private road. That's how we have it laid out. But with the layout itself, it's forgiving in a sense that we can spread out the palms a little bit open on either end, going right or going up to your left. There's always ways that we can maneuver or place the trees somewhere else that's different that will make sense. So if we need to spread them apart a little bit more, we can be willing to do that.
Okay. Member Steve? Okay. Member Tom, questions for the applicant?
No questions.
Okay. Member John?
Let's clarification on that. At the corner of Paracella and Cerritos, you have 3 Mediterranean fan palms. Different picture than what we're seeing up there. I believe that is where recommendation 1 is to pull them back out of the 30-foot corner cutback area.
Okay.
Protection of intersection visibility. That's where I would be more concerned about.
On this side of the layout, not on the opposing side?
Correct. So those are public, you've got the public roads and.
That is correct. See, this is the area what I would actually recommend to move them. The other one is more of on a private road and it's on a straightaway. This corner right here, you actually have a little bit more traffic of ongoing cars coming back, both in east and west and both south and north. So you will have more traffic on this corner.
Yeah, so based on the city code, that corner needs to be addressed in terms of placement.
I can definitely move the palm trees back. And, you know, once Mediterranean palm tree gets to full growth, it's only going to be a max of 12 to 15 feet tall. They will lace out as they grow. They don't get fuller. You know, we're trying to maintain them where they're just single stock, multi-trunk. So like an average Mexican fan palm, you'll actually see it grow and you'll have a stock of it. And then eventually the head of it will be above, you know, a sight where you won't be able to come across it and be blinded or, you know, not have a blind spot.
Right, but you still have.
Yeah, you still have 10 years.
Some there,
before.
so just, yeah, take a look at that.
Okay, definitely, made note of it now.
And my only other concern is I am in agreement with the staff. I think I read in here that the quantity of plants with a single plant placement spread around. I think phase 1 looks nice. I think you could take that and, you know, do a little more clustering of like kind plants and perhaps some more of the coprosma. They seem to be a bit spread out in phase 1.
So you would like
I know they grow, but they're still pretty far apart.
We'd like to see more clusters.
Right.
We were anticipating to put a little bit more greenery on this corner. It's a little bit more on the desert side on the first phase, which we're also going to incorporate some more greenery in both phases as we progress. But clustering will be a good idea, and we can manage that, especially where we're going to have focal points. So that'll be a good idea that we can do. What we tried to do is just mimic what we already had, but your comments and ideas are more than welcome.
Great improvement of what it is now. Thank you.
Member Sean, questions?
Couple questions. What are the rooms on the interior of the building, and why haven't you noted any windows or doors or anything like that? So I'm having trouble seeing how this really responded to the owner's needs without really taking into account what their views are from the interior of the buildings.
You know, I really didn't take any note of that, to be honest with you. There is a board member here with us that maybe can answer those questions because I've never seen it in that perspective.
The other thing is so to me that's important with the landscape. I don't quite see how it responds to the needs of the owner, and it's not a question anymore. It's just a comment that I don't see how that's possible without analyzing what the views are from the interior. Just seems like it's just for the passerby.
I think it's more of two things. I think aesthetically, obviously, it's one, saving water. And I don't know if you've been inside the community. It's gorgeous inside. The views are all inside looking.
Let me just move on to the next one then. This rigid placement, I noticed it in some of the photographs from the prior phase, I guess in 2016.
Correct.
But it seems like there's a fairly If you can leave that one up there, and I guess cross-reference the planting plan, I don't quite get the connection between this rigid placement of plants and what you're proposing now, which is a similar rigid placement or spacing of plant material, all lined up, same distance from the sidewalk or the face of the curb. And so I guess the lack of connection is between that spacing and everything else I see throughout this plan, which is more of a natural placement. I don't quite make the connection. Frankly, it's not very attractive to me to see the two languages there. More of a comment.
Okay.
Member Kenny.
One more comment.
sorry.
I'm sorry, I forgot one thing. I guess I'm just agreeing with staff on the lack of interest with the same size boulder. Did you comment on that one yet?
I
Or
have
respond?
not commented on the boulders
I
yet
see.
at all.
Okay. That's all I had.
On the sizing of the boulders, when you were saying that you're not in agreement with staff, you were in agreement. Okay, thank you. Okay, Member Kenny, questions? Okay, so Mr. Elvis, when you look at the approved plan back on 2016, you see this green carpet area underneath the trees, the Palo Verde trees. So it's almost like I hate to use this word, but it's almost like an arroyo of green carpet, you know, that you're creating underneath. And I thought it was a solid idea because in a DG setting, you know, the irrigation from the green carpet could also be used to enforce the roots of the trees. In the new plan that you have, the green carpet is more placed sort of in the outer crown of the trees.
Correct.
So why that change?
Well, as you know, when you first plant a tree, the initial base of the root system of the tree is right by the base of the trunk. So it's no bigger than probably, I would say, once they're planted, a 24-inch box is no more than like maybe a foot and a half out. So once you start having the tree to mature, in order for it to stabilize so you don't have subsurface roots, you actually want to have the actual plant material a little bit further out, spaced out, where the canopy of the tree, once it gets to a maturity point, can be sustained where the root system can reach out to that water.
Mr. Elvis, I'm in total agreement with you. But right now, that ring, right, there's no other additional material inside that ring or outside of that ring.
Correct.
So this idea that you had before where you were creating this green carpet concept is now changed to a ring concept.
Well, once we're out there, we're going to see similarities to what we're going to do to place everything to the same kind of layout as we've learned. And we also want to adjust as best as we can to have, you know, better growth, obviously. If we start placing some of the plant material underneath the trees, we're not going to have the plant material grow as good as we possibly can, which we have noticed struggle and actually die several times. So there has been a period of time where we had to actually go back and plant material back in because one of the two things, got too much water, too shady, or one of the two. So we're trying to play with the layout, but it's kind of consistent in a similar way, but we're trying to play with the plant material so it's not too affected by shade or any other elements that we have underneath the trees.
So in that photograph there, you do see a palm tree on the left side. Was that installed as part of the 2016 phase?
Yes.
Okay. So on that concept, you had the, yeah.
I'm sorry. May I refer back to, was that palm tree planted? It was planted, right? Yeah. They were a cluster, yeah, no, because it's been a while.
Right. So on that phase, the palm trees were closer to the building. On this phase, the palm trees are now closer to the curb and sidewalk.
Now, those are two different types of trees. Med palms and fan palms.
Right. But you still have this layer of palm trees being installed on this phase closer to the building, and then I don't see the same type of palm trees closer to the building.
No.
I see a different type now being planted on the closer to the street.
Correct.
So how are you continuing the same concept into the new area?
By not putting in the Mexican fans?
By what?
By not putting in the Mexican fans, is that your question?
Right.
Well, I don't believe that we have to have Mexican fans in every area. They already have some already existing in that area. I'm presuming why we installed the ones that were there because there wasn't any there to begin with. There's some on the other end already existing. So I don't think it's necessary to just kind of match everything. Given the actual layout of the design, all we really did was kind of mirror the same existing thing, minus some plant materials that we didn't have good luck with, that we want to improve on. So we actually want to put in better quality plant material in. So there's a balance of everything, as you can see when you look at the plan itself. It's pretty diverse and it's pretty distinguished too and before from the previous phase to the phase now. There might be one or two, maybe 3 plants that are not going to be similar, but everything's pretty dead on as far as the layout. And I see what you're saying too about the palm trees. I don't believe we need them on the other end. They have plenty of trees inside the community and the outside. This side right here particularly didn't have much of anything when the phase was done. So that's probably why they incorporated it. Now, when I do the plans, I kind of follow the actual ideas of the homeowners association and what they actually want us to put together. So they, with them and us doing the job together, we put ideas together, and this is what we came up to.
Okay, one last question is, you have the crushed rocks on the median in between the curb and the
Correct.
sidewalk. On this one here, I believe you have no crushed rock, but what you have is boulders in between the plants.
We also have some crushed rock too.
Oh, on Cerritos Drive.
Yeah, and that's pretty similar to what we already have.
But you're not proposing any on Camino Paracela?
Not much, no. And we might extend it. Now, remember, like anything else, we're on a budget. We can only give so much material too.
But you also have to remember that we go by to what is presented here in the plans.
Correct.
So based on the description that you're saying today, that you're going to do things differently, that's news to us because we're basing it on this presentation and the information in front of us.
No, I understand that differently in the matter of what you see from prior phase 1 to phase 2. That's why you see the difference. That's the only different stuff that we're doing. Now, as far as me going in and actually going into the actual plan and changing it, I'm not changing it. Now, if I have to move a plant but keep the same plant material, move it a little bit different to appease the board, I'll be glad to do that. Now, if I have to add another ton of gravel or cobble to appease the board, I'll be glad to do that too. As long as the HOA is approving what I need to do to make it right so they can get their rebates back, I'll be gladly, work with you guys. I'll be glad to work with both you guys and the HOA.
Okay, thank you very much. I forgot to ask if there were comments on this case, but I'm pretty sure there are no comments. Okay, so thank you very much. We'll discuss it here now from the board members. Okay, I'd like to start the discussion with Member Steve.
I think what my sense is it seems pretty close to the design that was done prior, and I think with a few tweaks that we've discussed around the moving of the fan palms back and a little tighter clustering of some of the things, I think I'm
Okay, Member Tom.
Expanding on your comment about the green carpet under the trees, it's shown on the original plan that was approved, but if you look at the pictures of what's planted looks more like what's being suggested on this new plan. I think if anything, if more of that green carpet is provided, I would not put it under the tree. I would put it between the trees, so you've got more of a green connection. Other than that, I like it, and I think what they did in the first phase looks great.
Okay, Member John.
I support the staff recommendations. So when you get a chance, please take a look at those. And I agree with what has been said. That was part of my comment about Caprasma, the green carpet. That's what's creating it.
Okay, Member Sean.
No, nothing to add other than what I've already stated. Hard for me to look at these plans and not see any exterior windows or doors and make a fair judgment. I feel like I'm getting half a story for what we should be looking at or maybe creating for the people inside.
Don, as I'm looking at this elevation, I don't see windows at all.
Okay. My guess is there's some. I think we saw some photos, and it's not all solid wall.
I think that's a discussion we need to have on future landscape packages that come our way.
I see some there.
And Madam Chair, if I might just interject, I think that's an appropriate comment and something that staff should look for in the applications is to see how the architecture and the landscape relate to one another and looking at windows and views. So we thank you and appreciate that comment.
Thank you. Member Kenny.
No, nothing to add.
Okay. All right. So I'd like to add the discussion on when the pom-pom fan palms are being added, there is this idea that it creates another sort of texture layer. So one thing is to have it concentrated in a corner so that it creates its own massing. The other one is to space it in such way that is in between the Palo Verde trees or in between the plantings, so it creates sort of like another vocabulary or another layer before you see the building. So what I want to ask here, because we would like to be precise on our directions, is the corner treatment right now is there are three of them at the corner, and then there's two that are leading towards the parking area, as well as having other 5 of them on sheet 1 of 2 that is leading towards their parking area as well. So if we could be a little more precise on either pulling them where they're located at the corner so that there is no blind corner when people are driving. And then that in itself creates, I think, a sub-layer to the trees, to the Palo Verde trees. So anybody have any comment on that composition? Pull it as a line, as an offset line in between the sidewalk and then the Palo Verde. Yes, Member Tom.
I think that putting the palms in a line starts to make this a much more formal setup. I would certainly move the cluster out of the sight line on the corner, but I think a cluster on each end of the Palo Verde line might be appropriate.
Oh, I see. So the first Palo Verde, say on that corner, sorry, so Nordic on sheet 2 of 2. You see the first Palo Verde on the lower right corner? Have the palm trees be pulled back so it's in composition with the Palo Verde. And then the same thing on sheet 1 of 2. There's another Palo Verde there. And then the 3 palm trees are in composition with that Palo Verde. I'll buy that. So I think so far the comments we have is recomposition of the palm trees and then see if the green carpet could be, instead of a perfect ring around the crown, be more in between the Palo Verde so that it can create this carpet coverage idea. And we also want to highlight the comments by staff. We're agreeing to that. I'd like to see if we have a motion. Yes, Member Tom?
I move that we approve this plan incorporating the comments of staff and also asking that the palm groups at the corner cutoff area be moved, kept in a group, but put more towards the ends of the row of Palo Verdes, and that the green carpet that we're calling it fill in the gaps between the trees, but not necessarily be added below the trees.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second that.
Okay, Member Chan. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
When opposed? Thank you very much. Okay, we'll be moving to new business item 3, conserve landscape on behalf of Palm Springs Church of Christ, requesting approval for a minor architectural application. Staff report, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the AAC. So the item you have before you now is a minor architectural application by Palm Springs Church of Christ, and it is for a turf conversion. It is going to cover approximately 7,025 square feet of the area in question. And so if you take a look at the area photograph that has been displayed, those 4 sections of the frontage of the church property are the areas or the sections affected by this turf conversion. So there are principally 4 main areas. The largest portion of it is the area facing the church itself. So just a very brief background, this church development was completed in 1967. I'm not sure if there has been landscape maintenance since that time, but the following exhibits that are here that's now on the board shows the current condition of landscaping at the site. So in any case, this new conversion will be an improvement over what is currently the current condition at the site. As stated in the staff report, the area that is being involved in this with this proposal is only the frontage, not the remainder part of the church, going on the interior where landscaping is also been very blighted. So there are 2 main issues here, and those were discussed with the applicant. Number one, the proposal is from a church, and according to the applicant, there is limited resources available to the church to have an elaborate or an expanded landscaping for this site. Number 2, there are a series of 1-gallon plants that have been proposed. Staff is recommending to the AAC that should this application be recommended for approval, that the applicant be made to provide 5-gallon plants instead of the 1-gallon plant that's been proposed. Other than that, again, this will be a significant improvement over the current condition at the site. This area is the property to the north of this area is middle school, and to the south of it is another church premises. The landscaping at these other premises seem a little better than, much more maintained than this one here. So besides that, staff is recommending that, along with the condition that has been recommended, that the AAC make a recommendation of approval to the Director of Planning Services. That will conclude my report. I'm not sure if the applicant, I think the applicant is in the audience. So if you have any question, I will be available to answer those. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Questions for staff? Edward, I have a question.
Ma'am.
So according to the aerial, it looked like and then also the photographs, it looked like at some point it was just grass edge to edge.
That's correct, except for the mature trees at the side and some of those hedges, yeah, but the rest of it are not in good condition.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, is the applicant present? State your name and address and.
My name is Brent Sprague with Conserve Land Care.
I'm sorry, what was your name?
Brent Sprague.
Brent, did you have a chance to review the recommendations on issues from the staff?
I did meet with Edward on a couple occasions. I was not aware of the recommendation to make them 1 gallon to 5 gallon. We did talk about the resources that the church had. We did have a 5-gallon planting originally in that, but in talking with Edward, it was recommended, he felt like we needed more plant material. So to kind of stay within budget for them, we decided to reduce the plant size from 5 to 1 gallon, knowing that a lot of these 1-gallon plants will thrive, like you talked in the last one, Carissa macrocarpa, you know, Mexican birds of paradise, bougainvillea, those are all going to spread rapidly. So to fit with their budget, we did reduce them to 1-gallon size.
Okay. Would you like to add anything more to the presentation by staff?
I don't have anything unless... Yeah, so one of the things, again, to keep in with the budget, we stuck with just a simple DG throughout. Obviously, like even in the last plan you saw, we do like to usually incorporate some sort of cobble. But again, because 2 factors. One, because cobble is a little bit more expensive when you install that, and there is a middle school next to it. And so the concern with the church was that if we put larger cobble in, they get a lot of middle school students who can, you know, gather right there in front of the church, is that students might pick up rocks and want to throw them or do something like that. They've already had a wall damaged north of the property from middle school students, so that's why we left the cobble out of that area.
Thank you. Anyone here who would like to comment on this project? If not, Brent, we have some questions for you. You remain by the microphone. Okay. I'm going to start with Member Sean on questions for the applicant. Okay. Member John? Okay. Member Tom? Okay. Member Steve? Okay. Member Kenny?
Hi. In trying to sort of visualize the larger area that's off to the, I guess that would be the south of the existing building, there's a lot of the Barbara Karst bougainvillea sort of spread around evenly. I was just curious if you could comment a little on what was the thinking there in the design.
I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to David Navarro, who also is with Conserve Land Care, and he's the enhancement manager that designed the plans.
Okay.
Hi. So the idea was to kind of create just a pop of color right in the center, and even though it's kind of hard to see in this in that PDF, it's there's a slight mounding that would happen around that agave. So the idea was to create a little bit of a focal area, and more than anything, we in the original design we had it a little bit more open, but to meet that 50% coverage, we upped the plant quantity. So we could definitely thin some of this out.
So how high is this mounding that you're thinking about doing?
It's just a little bit of contouring, so it's not to exceed let's say 12 inches at the most, you know.
And the agave would sit up on top of that?
Exactly.
Okay. All right, that helps. Thank you.
So there's, for me, there's no question that this would be an improvement to what condition is there now. I think the question is really, will that improvement get to the point that your design it wants to achieve? So having said that, if I start from the right side, what you're doing is that you're putting this agave as your focal point, and then you have all the bougainvilleas growing around it. And then at the edge is where you have the Sesafina pulcherrima almost creating like a border. And so what it's creating is almost like a circle of composition that I think the agave is going to get lost in that focal point of it. And then to the left, you have this sort of beautiful, clear story church, oh goodness, architecturally.
Okay.
Anyway, you know what I mean, the stained glasses, yeah. Right. And then on the bottom of that, you have these 3 bougainvillea at 1 gallon trying to compose to that architectural element, and it will get lost. And then on the outer side, closer to the sidewalk, again, you're introducing this Sesafina And I know why you're doing the Caesalpinia because it has some vertical height to it. But I think part of my issue is that if we have this large area that we want to cover, do we want to do it something with desert, spoons or something that has, or a desert grass that has volume and mass, and it could actually cover, this frontage for you without trying to have this sprinkled of smaller plants.
So most of these plants that you see on here, just to address the size of the plants, if you take your standard bougainvillea, it's going to grow about 3 feet in each direction. So it's fairly large plant material. Your green carpets are going to sprawl as well. So ideally, when you see it here, that's probably at its mature state. So everything will, in about 2 seasons, will fill in. I do agree with you in regards to the Caesalpinias, the Mexican birds of paradise, that it is going to create that hedge. We are more than happy to take plant material out. It will help reduce our installation costs and irrigation costs, which we kind of needed on this project. So it'll kind of let that space kind of breathe for sure. And in regards to planting around that peak on the left, the idea was to have the Tacomas kind of be a backdrop and let that peak kind of stand out. We could introduce other plant material like you said, desert spoons, but desert spoon is a slow growing plant material, so we would have to start it at, let's say, like a 15-gallon to be able to appreciate what it is. So it's kind of a dance, I guess, with budget and design on this one.
So you're saying that the 1-gallon bougainvillea in 2 seasons is going to grow to 9 square feet of coverage?
It will grow, yeah. It's a fast-growing plant material.
Okay. Final round of questions for applicant. Member Sean.
Discussion.
Okay.
The only other question I had, the 3 existing trees that you're calling out for with removing the grass, have you planned for adequate irrigation for those trees?
Yes. So for those trees, what we'll do is we'll do drip rings to try to mimic the surface water that it's getting, or that it should be getting. But yeah. So yes.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Just one question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Stay there.
The Bougainvillea Barbara karst, what is your height on that?
So,
how tall does it grow?
Yeah, so if it's maintained.
No, how tall does it grow?
Like height-wise, right?
If you let it go, how tall is it going to get?
If you do nothing to it, it should maybe 5-6 feet. It gets big, but if it's properly maintained, we should be able to keep it, not to exceed 30 inches, which you see everywhere.
Again, as a 1-gallon, that's what you're claiming.
Well, yeah, everything grows, right? Everything.
Okay. Okay.
So with proper maintenance, describe to me how you would plan to maintain that over the next 5 years.
Yeah, it should be natural pruning. So anything that starts to sprawl up, then you start thinning it out. No squares, no little circles. It should be maintained, not at that 30 inches. So the idea with the design was to create this tier layout. So where you have the green carpet as a base, then you have the bougainvilleas, and then as a backdrop to all that, you have the Mexican birds.
Have you shown the client what the Caesalpinia looks like in the winter?
They go deciduous. Yeah. So he is aware of it.
Brent, you have to be really close to the mic.
You have a trustee from the church if you need to ask any questions of him. But yeah, we've shown him the different pictures of what the plant material looks like. One of the things I would also like to say is we obviously are not the on-site maintenance company that would be handling the maintenance after the fact. We are simply installing the plant material, but I have discussed it with the board as well, how they should be maintaining this in a natural state and not just shaping them and giving them balls and cake-looking plants, but to keep it in a natural state.
Thank you, Brent. All right, thank you very much. Okay, I'll start the discussion with Member Sean.
generally, I'd say the design just kind of, for me, falls a little bit short on trying to maybe engage some of the existing more mature trees that are there, like the olive and it's a pine tree I'm looking at. I can't quite tell because the plans are actually a little bit difficult to understand. I'm going to make the same comment about the windows and doors. Tough to really see what the landscape's trying to engage with the buildings themselves without having the windows and doors shown. And especially, I mean, in addition to that, the existing tree species, I see that written down here a few times, existing to remain. It's a hedge, but I don't know what kind of hedge it is. Same with the trees. So I'm not quite sure how much we can get into a redesign of this project now. I liked some of the things you had to say, Maria, but I don't quite sure how well that was understood by the applicant also. He talked about, well, removing some things would help us with our budget, but I don't think that's what you were saying. It's not what I was saying or what I was imagining when you were saying it. Maybe the removal of some of these, like you said, they're everywhere, the bougainvillea. It'd be nice to see something of a bit more interest that I don't see everywhere on this project. And not sure what the Cesalpine is going to do to that existing hedge. Looking at the photos, that hedge looks like it's about 18 inches tall behind it. And if you're talking about this layering effect in height from crescendo from something very low at the street up higher to the Cesalpine, then I think that hedge gets buried in the back. So to me, it could use a bit more, I don't know, something a little more interesting than just, I think, as you stated, something, I see this kind of thing everywhere, and it's lacking a little interest to me.
And remember, Sean, like one of the ideas is that, for example, if they have I'm going to exaggerate, but if they have a sea of Cesalpinias, then that's sort of a composition of one type that reinforces a color, a composition offset to the building. Where if you have many of different types, it's hard to have the eye follow through and then be in composition with the building. So my comment to you is that fewer more, could that give them fewer different types, but more in numbers will get them more to have coverage and cleaner composition to this building? Would that be a general direction?
I think instead of 15 or let's say 12 bougainvillea, 11 or 12 after a quick count on that front yard in front of the hedges, I'd rather see 2 or 3 yucca or something like that with some boulders and something done interesting with the gravel, maybe more of the lower green carpet, something like that. Just a bit more interest, well-placed, much more intentional, really nice species of a less item or two than I'm getting a bit of chaos looking at the bougainvillea, the orange Cesalpina and the yellow and the green. It's difficult to take all that in for me. I'd rather see something a bit more monotone, well-grouped, much more intentional.
Thank you, Sean.
Yep.
Member John.
I am thinking along the same lines. I don't really see any nod to the architecture or the intent of the use of the building. Being a church, I think that you want to honor the intent of why people are there. With beneath the spire on the south, where it says existing to remain.
Spire. That's the right word.
To remain, there's weeds and a jumble. I understand that a portion of it closer to the true entry of the building is some lantana, and to continue that would be fine, but the existing to remain doesn't work. The stepping back, if you were standing across the street, according to this plan, there's no balance. The south perimeter wall and the north perimeter wall don't match in terms of giving any demarcation of this is our property and we've had intention of what we're trying to do here. The 3 plants at the north planting area under the ficus, the existing ficus tree, is completely insufficient. The walkway, if I were to drive in and park, I presume, being a layman, that I would be using that walkway, and I don't find that the plants chosen to be, as I'm walking towards the front door, the plants out in the field of plants, the Calcepinia, wouldn't be a particularly attractive entry. In the winter, they're twigs. And I think something that gives a better nod to the architecture could certainly be brought to us.
Thank you. Member Tom.
I think the agave is kind of an orphan. It doesn't seem to me to really relate to any of the other plant material, which is mainly deep greens and flowering things, and it just seems that cactus element is out of place. Also, it looks like the intent was to basically get this material to cover the ground almost like a carpet, replacing the grass with something else that would be solid. I think it's certainly okay in the design that the bougainvillea be clustered and that we see shaped edges of the decomposed granite between the different plant groups. So it doesn't have to be one solid mass of plants. It could be some carefully placed multiple groups. And also the agave wants to kind of bring your eye to the center of that long blank wall, where I think really the center of this building is the prow of the ship of that church that points out, and I think that should be the prime point of landscape enhancing the building.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Tom's comments. I think a little bit more focus on the where the stained glass is in the church would be more appropriate than the blank wall on the other side. I agree with the agave feels kind of lonely in that spot, and some tighter clustering of things with a bit more open space in between, I think would be a good addition.
So I think we're having issues with the design in which but the applicant can hear all the advice that we're making and come back with a revised design, or we could if it goes to subcommittee, it means that we're accepting the design in some shape and form. So and then if we decide not to approve the project, then it will be from the applicant and the staff to continue working on this. And I can't stop saying that this is an amazing effort to wanting to improve the landscape in the area. It's a beautiful church. It's right next to the school, which is also a beautiful school. So the intentions are really well put together. It's just that we want to continue enhancing the building, and the landscape needs to do that as well. So having said that, I think the applicant and staff will need to go back to the board and work at it with the comments that have been made. Is there a motion? Yes, Member Sean.
Yeah, so I'll make a motion that we reject this proposal and send it back for a redesign with the comments that we've included here. Should I repeat them all, or we think we've got the basics?
We'll go ahead and transcribe your comments and provide those to the applicant, and then we'll have Mr. Robertson work with the applicant on implementing those suggestions.
Okay. Is anybody, I think that was a motion. We need a second.
I'll second.
Oh, Member Kenny. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. We have closed the case. If you would like to share the comment with the staff, then they can share that with us. Yeah. Okay, so we have the next case, which is a little bit lengthy. Should we take a 5-minute break? Okay, all right. We'll be back at 4:07. Okay, so we're back on track a little later, 4:09. Thank you for waiting. We will be moving to Freehold Communities LLC, request for a preliminary plan development district and major architectural application for the development of the condominium complex of undeveloped parcel in planning area 5 of phase 1. Staff report, please.
Yeah, once again, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the AAC. So what I'm going to do is to provide the AAC a brief background of this project and also the process of the application that is before you. So the Maryland development was approved way back in 2004, and at the time it was approved as a planned development district that will consist a total of 1,150 residential units. Out of those, 750 were to be single-family residents, and 398 of those will be multi-family development. So what you have before you today is also a preliminary plan development district application for the multi-family component of the residential development. So on the board, the exhibit you see there is for the whole. I'm going to get up a little bit. So what you have here is the entire Maryland development. So on the perimeter of the site is mostly the single-family residence. This area, this U-shaped area, is the multi-family parcel. So this is 16.1 acre. There are two sections of the site that is reserved for multi-family. So this is the area 5, and here is the other one, part of phase 2. So phase 1 is this site here, and the applicant is proposing 153 condominium units. So as I stated earlier, this development was approved in 2004 by the City Council as a planned development district. However, there was a condition that was imposed on this project at the time, that when this portion of the development comes back for a review process, it be developed with R3 standards. So even though it says preliminary plan development district, the applicant is now requesting for any deviation or any relief from the code requirement. This project has been conditioned to comply with R3 development standards, both in open space requirement, density, height, and setback requirements, and building separations. All these are to comply with R3 development standards. And a preliminary review of the proposal by staff indicates that the applicant has complied with all those development standards. There are two issues that staff has pointed out here. Number one is the non-provision of a central trash enclosure. However, the applicant will elaborate more on that when he comes up to speak. And also to let the AAC know that a final detailed landscape plans and architectural plans will be brought back to you on final development plans. Just for the benefit of those that are relatively new on the board, a preliminary plan development district application requires 2 reviews as stated in our code. The first phase will be the preliminary, where you review the architectural mass and the type of architecture that has been proposed. That goes to, if it's approved or if you recommend approval at that stage, it goes to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission, if approved, goes to the Council for approval. Then it comes back to you as a final PD. That's when more detailed or any type of conditions that may have been recommended by AAC or imposed by the Planning Commission will be incorporated into the project and then comes back to you for a review. So again, even though this is a preliminary plan development district application, the applicant is now requesting or is not requesting or asking for any deviation from the code or relief from the R3 development standards. Having said that, there are the site plan, the following exhibit will show you more about the site plan itself. And as I stated earlier, there are 153 units that have been proposed. According to the number of units that the multifamily area allows, this parcel could accommodate up to 166. However, the applicant is proposing 153 units. On this particular component of the development, the applicant has twice gone before the Planning Commission as a study session. I noted that in your staff report, and there were 5 main areas that I paraphrased in that report where the Planning Commission wanted the applicant to improve upon. So those are that the applicant provide a common pool for residents of the multifamily development, to provide shade structures throughout the community, and provide misters at the shade structures. Also to provide more seating throughout the community, and the units along the patio should have offsets to give variety and depth to the patio space. And also that the applicant to comply with the previously adopted design elements of the single-family component of this development. Again, my intention is just to provide you with those brief background. I'm going to call on the applicant and his architect who are here to talk more about the site planning and the type of units that have been proposed before you. I have more exhibits here that shows the plan types that have been proposed. As I mentioned in the staff report, there are 5 main housing types, both clustered and individual units that are being proposed here. And also I have renderings to show you what it will look like upon completion. There are 5 different renders that I have here, but also in your package, I have more exhibits that shows the floor plans, that shows elevations, the sections, and also the type of materials that are being proposed. And as I mentioned, a conceptual landscaping was part of this proposal at this stage. However, a more detailed landscape plan will come back to you at the final PD stage. That essentially concludes my report, and if there's any question, I'm available to answer those, but the applicant will want time to present the architecture and the design to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Question for staff before the applicant presentation? Yes, Member Tom.
Has the fire department reviewed this and approved it?
What they did, and what they do is give us some conditions, propose some conditions. But in this case, they referred us to the original conditions that were already approved by the City Council.
So do you know, is one of the conditions that there's no parking on the streets? Other than the guest parking turnouts?
Yeah, no, but that was not part of the condition at this point.
Do you know when will the olive tree grove be planted, before this, during this, or after this?
I will let the applicant speak to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay, is the applicant present?
Hi there. My name is Brad Schuckhart. I work for Freehold Communities. We are the owner of the larger Miralon project. So thank you first and foremost for your time today. I am going to spend just a couple of brief moments talking about a couple of things. One, Edward, thank you for setting the context of this project. It is really a project within a project. And I think context is important because while we're not asking for any deviations from R3 standards, which require, for example, 45% open space, which is a combination of private and public open space per the code, I think it's important to note that this piece relates to and is surrounded by nearly 70 acres of open space. So One of the conditions, for example, that was mentioned by the Planning Commission in our 2 study sessions was with respect to the amenity package that was specific to this planning area. And one of our responses to that was, please keep in mind that this sits immediately adjacent to what will be a 12,000 square foot community clubhouse that is designed for the community as a whole, and frankly, we want to drive activity to that location rather than create a subset of homeowners that have their own kind of fiefdom is a poor choice of words, but their own little enclave. So having said that, this slide simply illustrates the fact that this project, this planning area, sits amongst the groves. To answer a question that was posed as to when the groves will be planted, the answer to that is within the week if the weather holds and we can get the valves in place. And if not this week, next. It's a large grove, so it'll take roughly a month to get in, barring unforeseen circumstances, but we are in process. So it will proceed well in advance of this development. The lines on here represent various trail connections. There are connections to the social spaces that sit adjacent to the lakes, and then you can see the clubhouse in kind of the upper right-hand corner of this graphic. And then similarly, this slide was put together in response to one of the concerns of the Planning Commission, which was, okay, if you want to drive people to the clubhouse, how long is it going to take them to get there? And the answer is you can, even from the furthest southerly reaches of this planning area, you can get to the central amenity features at the clubhouse and the westerly social space in less than 10 minutes at a relatively leisurely paced walk. This is the planning area as the plan that's been proposed, and the circles, or excuse me, the squares here represent the various plan types that Edward suggested, and we can dig into the details. But one last comment before I turn it over to Colin Liu from Robert Heide Architects is, Freehold is a master planned community developer. That means we're horizontal guys, we're not vertical guys. So we want to kind of set the groundwork for what a future builder will, kind of the framework within which they have to play. But we're not here to advocate for any particular floor plans per se. All of those details will be worked out ultimately by our builder. It's just that we can't advise somebody as to what the appropriate price is or really even have a fruitful discussion with a builder until we understand what the yield on this is going to be and what the, how many units, how big are they, those sorts of things, because ultimately that results in sort of a residual value that allows us to negotiate on equal footing. So having said that, I will turn it now over to Colin Liu from Robert Heide, who can talk about the architectural elements, and then I will jump back up here and talk at that very high level about the landscaping elements. And we do have a representative from C2, Nikki Wu, here, if you have detailed questions about the landscaping side of things.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Colin Liu. I'm going to discuss a little bit about the site planning aspect of it. On the screen, the site is located, as Edward mentioned earlier, it's on a loop street. It's a U-shaped loop street with sidewalk on the inside of the loop, and then and also a central north to south pedestrian-only paseo. There are a series of 5 social areas that are linked inside this this common paseo. The plans are, there's 153 units. There are single-story duplex units. That's the 2 smaller plans. That's approximately 1,150 square feet and foot in selling area. And then 2-story units, plan 3, 4, and 5, that range up to 1,800 square feet. The plans are organized in a more or less like a cluster configuration. By that, sorry, I need to find the, okay, here we go. So what's showing you on the screen is the plan 3 and plan 4 on the very left-hand side are 2-story units that take access directly from the street. The plans 1 and 2, they are single-story duplexes, are accessed from the lane, the motor court. You walk down further down the motor court and you access the units individually. The plans, each unit has its own private yards. The buildings are set 15 feet apart. The 2-story units. And then there are these, the 4-plex units that are ringed around the outside edge of the U-shaped loop street. Again, plans 3 and 4 facing the street. Plan 5 is accessed further down from the alley. There are 3 elevation styles assigned to each plan type to avoid the monotonous of the building elevations. This is a shot from standing from the northern edge, looking down south. This is that shade structure. As you see, it's the beginning of the northern side of the pedestrian paseo. As you walk on the very southern end of the paseo is a common social area. It's a dog park with seating areas and lawn area. And then on the very southern edge of the paseo is the trailhead that leads to the trails that one would be able to walk through the olive orchards. Rendering number 6 is a view from the west side looking into this multifamily community. Again, we're going after this model of rather than having all attached units, separating the units into individual. They're detached condominiums that would allow for private yards. There's architecture on all 4 sides. The units daylight well. I found at the end of each cluster, one will be able to access the common open space, which is the olive groves. I believe there are a total of 15 clusters that are ringed on the edge of the site. As you can see, indicated by the red arrows, that one will be able to access the common open space around the ring. So that's kind of what I have to say about the architecture. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you might have regarding the elevations. I know it's a lot of information that's being presented in front of you, so please let us know if you have any other question. I'm going to turn it back to Brad to discuss more about the landscape features.
So I am not a landscape designer, so I will go through this as quickly as I can and let you ask the questions of the experts after the fact. But Colin mentioned a couple of things that we started with and then tweaked over the course of time during our conversation with the Planning Commission. The first of which is this entry sequence along Palladium, which is the northern border of the project. One of the overriding themes of this project and kind of Miralon as a whole is the juxtaposition of formal plantings and informal plantings. And so we've incorporated that into a formal planting scheme on the north side of this. The other element that we've included is an 8-foot wide sidewalk along the northerly border that connects the cart path on the west side of the planting area to the cart path on the east side. Sorry, it's DG on the west and concrete path on the east side of this, which was a requirement of the original approved or as modified PDD. This slide also starts to show the central greenbelt element as it extends subtly into the project. The shade structure at the northern end you previously saw, which is an accommodation to one of the recommendations of the Planning Commission. Here is an elevation of that same northerly entrance. You can see the formal planting in the front. There's the shade structure and bracketed by units on the left and the right. Here is deeper into the paseo. You can see that Units that front onto the Paseo actually take access directly thereon. There are these low-walled patio areas that allow for the interaction between residents and passersby. And this is sort of a self-selecting thing. People that want that interaction with, we think will be drawn to those sorts of units. People that don't necessarily want to be bothered by people walking in front of them will look elsewhere within the planning area. This Oasis Plaza sits immediately in the middle of the project. It's basically the midway point between that north-south greenbelt and an enhanced walking / vehicular access path. And when I say enhanced, it's enhanced with additional landscaping because we wanted to create an east-westerly movement that was not just these alleyways, but something that at least gave a little more, a little softer feel for those people that wanted to take that path. And at the middle of it, we've created another shade structure and beefed up the planning there to create a social hub of sorts. This, again, an elevation, sort of taking a look at that. You can see sprinkled throughout this greenbelt area, there are these, the sidewalk is sort of articulated to create interest, but it also creates these little seating areas where we have built-in benches and allow people to congregate. And then the southerly terminus is what we're calling, sorry, it's not the terminus per se. We actually extended the greenbelt beyond at the request of the Planning Commission, but at the southerly end of the U, if you will, there's a open area. Colin referred to it as a dog park. I think it's a dog park in an informal sense. It's not intended to be, take your dog off the leash, but it's just a place for, in the evenings you want to take your dog for a walk. There will be a firebox, there'll be a shade structure. You saw the built-in place seating and the rendering, so basically another place to congregate. I make the distinction though because at the amenity center we have two dedicated dog parks where we anticipate people that want to take their dogs off leash, they can be there within 5 minutes and let them recreate in that way. Southerly trail access, I think we've already addressed. Another shade structure there, again in response to the Planning Commission. And then Colin mentioned the penetrations on both the east and the west. At each of the end of those alleys, we have the ability for our residents to get immediately out into the groves. And there is a trail that's immediately adjacent to the planning area on the east side. That gives ready access to the social spaces in the southeast of the project and also the amenity center. On the west side, one of the things the Planning Commission originally suggested was to install another trail immediately adjacent to the west. And we've pushed back against that, and Planning Commission seems to have concurred because we like the experience of our residents actually getting out into the groves. It's a very different experience. The idea of grabbing your book once these trees mature and grabbing a blanket of sorts and getting out there and plopping down and sitting out there and reading under the trees. So that was by design rather than by happenstance. And that's all I have. We're certainly happy to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Brad, can you set the tone? As you mentioned that you're the developer, and so there will be something like Toll Brothers coming to you and saying, okay, we want to develop the multifamily area. So at that point, would they adopt the design that we are looking today, or would they have their own architects and then come up with something that is similar to this style?
Well, I'm sure Robert Heidi would be happy to do work for them, but my expectation is it would be a well-qualified third-party architect that they would hire to do the specific floor plans. What we're trying to do is what we tried to do with the original PDD, or now the final PDD, which is set the boundaries within which these guys will create their specific design. And that's important to us for many reasons, not the least of which is we want to deliver a quality product. So as it was with the larger planning PDD, we, for example, specified materials. And I believe if you look in your details there, we've included some of those same pages because we want to carry over those design elements into this to create some continuity. while giving the architects enough flexibility to do something creative and meet market demands. So long-winded way of saying is, whatever it is that gets approved here as part of this preliminary PDD will be the rules by which the final PDD will be adjudicated.
But the final PDD will be brought by the...
Likely by another party.
By another party.
You'd see us, if this were for the final PDD, we'd be the row behind the Toll Brothers or whomever it would be.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could just interject as well. As you're aware, the Plan Development District process is a two-stage process, as Mr. Robertson has already indicated, that the applicant comes forward with the preliminary plan development plans, which are schematic in nature, and then at the final plan development stage, we see more developed drawings. So we'll get into the specifics of the placement of all the landscape materials, the sizes, et cetera, as well as the colors, materials, and making sure that they're generally consistent with the preliminary plan development. If, for example, the third-party builder comes back with something that is substantially different than what you're seeing today, we would have to have them go back through the preliminary plan development process. And so it needs to be generally consistent with what you're seeing here today in terms of the final PDD. I just want to make sure that that's clear to both the applicant and to our AAC, that if the final PD comes back as something different than what we're seeing here today, we'll go back through the preliminary plan development stage.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so questions for the applicant, starting with Member Steve. Okay, Member Tom.
A couple of questions. All of the community shared spaces, like it talks about social gardens and community gardens and pool, all that is off-site?
Yes, I mean, those elements you just mentioned, I mean, we would argue that the Central Paseo and the park at the southerly end of the loop are on-site and also amenities or features of the development. But yes, those specifically, the social spaces and the dog park and the amenities and the clubhouse are off-site technically.
And trash collection, you're now suggesting that you not have trash enclosures and that the cans are picked up at each individual home?
Yes, we've made, again, recognizing that these are preliminary, this is a preliminary look at this project in general. Because each of these homes have private yards, there's room for individual trash cans. So the anticipation is that they would be stored within, their de facto property.
Years ago, I worked for Mobile Land Development, and we did a very similar process where Mobile bought a big chunk of land and divided it up. So if I'm understanding the director correctly and you, we're not approving any specific plans today. We're approving the concept of these plans and this site plan, but we're going to get specifics when your specific builder purchases the land from you.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Hey, Member John, questions for the applicant?
With the landscape materials packages, we see some of the gate criteria, patio gates, entry ways. Some have lights, some do not. Some have doorbells, some do not. I mean, that's little stuff. But in the bigger picture, I don't see any concept of street lighting or processes. Will it be tall poles for broad lighting? Will it? There's a picture in here that looks like some are building mounted. What's a nighttime feel?
Yeah, sorry, I look backwards because there are actually no streetlights in this entire project. The only streetlights that are likely to be installed are at the clubhouse, which is by code. But this project, at least the larger PDD, falls under the dark sky ordinance, and that was the streetlights were specifically precluded. So any lighting that would be mounted on the units themselves, and there are restrictions as to how that light is treated, because we do have neighbors, even if those neighbors are other single-family buyers within the broader Mira Lawn community that we're sensitive, and neighbors more broadly in that we are adjacent to Palermo, and we've been purposefully cognizant of playing nice with everybody that's around us. That's the intention there.
Okay. And I presume lighted numbers for fire? That line?
Yes, we would certainly comply with any sort of code. And it was asked earlier whether fire had looked at this. The answer is yes. Early on, we met with fire officials. We had concerns about street widths and making sure we were compliant. And we have created street parking, but they're in designated areas. So yes, so the long and the short is fire is aware of this design. They've largely signed off, and to the extent that they had a requirement to light up numbering or anything like that, we would comply.
Okay, Member Sean, Member John, were you done with your questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Member Sean, questions?
I think hardscape materials are kind of off the discussion right now, because that's something that the finer materials will be coming back.
The specific materials will be coming back, but looking at the layout and looking at the configuration of materials, for example, distinguishing between street materials versus sidewalk materials, those are all appropriate questions to ask at this stage.
And one more question for you. Density and adjacencies, that's one of the things we're discussing now.
In terms of the density, it complies with both the general plan and the plan development district that's been approved for this pod. But looking at adjacencies, as Mr. Robertson has indicated, it does meet the setbacks or the building separation requirements in the R3 zoning district. Looking at the overall site plan and how the units relate to one another is also part of your purview as this preliminary plan development review.
Okay. Well then, one quick question for the applicant. The condo area, is there a community pool within that area?
Not as proposed. So you're talking about just the broader land plan. And again, that was a question that the Planning Commission asked, that we look at the viability of including an individual pool or a pool for this particular planning area. I would suggest two things. One, this is amongst the closest, these units are amongst the closest to the clubhouse, which is set to break ground the latter part of July or August of this year. And that will have 2 pools and a spa. 2, we're cognizant of the cost to our homeowners, and we're already including them in likely not only the original HOA, but also a sub-HOA to maintain yards, which is typical of a condominium development. Adding a pool to that mix will increase that burden. And 3, this doesn't relate specifically to this planning area, but the notion that you'd have to have a public pool or a publicly available pool adjacent or proximate to these units was not an issue on the larger single-family development, and frankly, these folks are a lot closer to the central amenity than people would be in some of these farther flung single-family lots. And lastly, and I don't mean to belabor the point, but these homes do in large part function like private, like single-family homes in many instances, and the yards, while not enormous, are in most cases big enough to include a plunge pool to the extent that the buyer would want to go down that path.
Okay, Member Kenny, questions?
Thank you for covering the pool question. That was at the top of my list. So you'll be building the clubhouse, and then the a builder will come in and take it from there.
Yeah, sorry, that's the one distinction I should have made. So we do all the horizontal stuff, the exception being the clubhouse. There's a gatehouse that existed. We've rehabilitated that. It's the north side of the project. We are going to bid on the clubhouse by June 1st. That's likely a couple months to award that bid, and we will break ground shortly thereafter. We're trying to coincide the start of that construction with the start of our first models, which are on the single-family portion of the, and that's those. So we will build the the clubhouse, the models are being built by a home builder that we've sold the lots to. And that is likely a 12-month build, 12 to 14-month build, depending on weather. And so given that we're just starting the process on here, and we've yet to even market it, I suspect that the clubhouse, if not completed, will be nearly completed by the time this breaks ground.
Thank you. And you mentioned that there would be 2 pools and a spa at the clubhouse?
Yes.
I heard what you said on the swimming pool concept. I'm always pushing for more pools rather than less pools, because that's, I think, one of the allures of the desert, being the swimming pool as a place to hang out. So I think it would be, if that is the way it ultimately turns out, I think it would be really important that there is room for that plunge pool on each of these units. So just something to keep in mind. Right now it sounds underpooled, if I can make up an expression. The other question that I had, I was trying to sort of get a, can you give me, like, if I lived in the lower left-hand corner of this U and I was not adjacent to the main walkway down the middle, what would be my options for walking up to the clubhouse? Can you give me a quick tour?
Yeah, Edward, do you have your microphone? Thank you. So, first of all, distance-wise, so the length of the red line is a little bit less than half a mile, and everything else is shorter. So, let's just say, by way of example, you lived in this corner here. There is internally on the inside of this loop, there's a pedestrian, there's a sidewalk. And frankly, it's amongst the only sidewalks in the entire development. The way this was originally approved and built, there are no sidewalks in the single family areas. Nonetheless, we made that accommodation internally here. As I mentioned, there's a 8-foot sidewalk along the northern edge of this. So this resident, if they wanted to get up here, the dog parks are here, this is the clubhouse just in general, they would walk up either this side or through the Paseo up to the 8-foot wide walkway, cross the street here, and then access sort of around through the dog parks. There's a trail that runs from this point to this corner of the parking lot, and then into the clubhouse. So all told, that is a third of a mile by following the blue line.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. The last question was, have you given any thoughts to guest parking in this cluster?
Yes. So the guest parking happens primarily around that loop. There are a couple of guest parking spots tucked elsewhere in the community, but R3 implies a certain, and given this number of units, implies a certain number of guest parking spots. Mm-hmm. And I know it's difficult to read, but we're actually overparked here significantly. And from a guest parking perspective, we are overparked by a factor of, one, meaning one more parking spot than required.
So I'm not too concerned about the number of them, just that they would be located near-ish or sprinkled around so that somebody didn't have to park at the clubhouse and then walk all the way back in this path that you just laid out for me.
Yeah. So the guest parking are assigned. There's a 0.25 guest parking assigned to each unit that has less than 3 bedrooms, and then 0.5 guest parking for the units that are larger than 3 bedrooms, and all of the parking space are within 150 feet walking distance to the front door.
Okay, super. Thank you. That's all the questions I had for now.
So there's 853 condominiums, and you have 5 types of building floor plans, and I'm guessing that there's also 5 type of exterior elevation designs. I was in Irvine this weekend, and I was just exactly in a development that is exactly like this, but they're more French Italianate homes style. So it's a very smart design. My question is, for 853 units, that means like about 170 repetitions of each unit type. Is that what is typical on this?
If I may explain a little bit, for this multifamily site, we have a total of 153 units, and there are 5 plant types just to address these 153 units.
Okay.
And each plant type will have 3 elevation designs. So we have 15 different elevation designs for 153 units. And that's just for this, this parcel.
Okay. Oh, okay, so 853 is the total for your multifamily. Okay, got it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I know numbers can get jumbled. So just taking a step back, the project is entitled for 1,150 units.
Right.
Of which roughly 750, I think it's 752 technically, are single family. The balance, or 396 or 398, are multifamily, broken up into 2 planning areas. This planning area could accommodate up to 166, but as planned and as drawn here, we're looking at 153 units. And then as Colin suggested, there are basically 15 variations when you combine floor plans and elevations that we're looking at. So roughly the same unit would appear 10 times. The mix is different, so
right.
But on average.
Okay, so Brad, could I have Colin back?
Sure.
So this idea of the paseo that's running up and down, what I see is that you have on one side you have the 1-story duplex unit, and then on the other side you have the 2-story standalone. Yeah, was that on purpose? Why 1-story on one side and then 2-story on the other? I think along the way, what my question is, I almost understand this logic that where the car is going is where you have the 2-story buildings. But where the people are going, you almost have a combination of 1-story and 2-story. So I want to ask you sort of like what is the sort of the tunnel concept that you are trying to create here?
Okay, it all comes down to fitting these units onto the site. And we're trying to make it as efficient as possible while achieving the overall, the required common open space.
Right.
With that said, and also fire department, we spoke to Ron Beverly, and he gave us a lot of feedbacks about the backing up distance. Yeah. That drives a very rigid, almost very Army bunker-like design. And by doing so, then we have this common paseo here, where on one side, these are all where the duplexes are located here. And then it's on this side, it's the the 2-story units here.
Right.
And then we run over on the right side of the common paseo, we actually have more depth. So the duplex are in the middle, and then flanked by 2-story units on either side. That's just the way that this land plan happened to fall. It just so happened that that's the way it's being laid out. But I think C2 Collaborative did a very good job of balancing the 1-story and the 2-story along this paseo, where you have the 1-story units, they place a tall palm trees there. And then when you have a 2-story unit, there's actually a smaller, lower tree, as indicated by the renderings here.
You could have that paseo be flanked by 2 1-story buildings.
You could.
So wherever people are going through, there's not a 2nd story looking down into that paseo.
Not necessarily. We think that the paseo could be a very good amenity for 2-story units looking down. And these 2-story that we're proposing they're not like a 2-story box. It's really partially, the 2nd floor is very limited on the 2nd floor. So you do get a story and a half, a partial 2-story read along the paseo. So it's not like a 2-story wall.
Right. It's just that on the right side of the paseo, you have these 2 stories almost looking down into the 1-story building. Along that street.
Fine. So what you're saying is the elevation on the left-hand side with the two-story, with the balcony, be able to look down into the single story? Is that what your concern is?
If you go back to your site plan,
Yes? Oops. Okay. Sorry.
okay, so you have the paseo right at the center.
Yes.
See that? On the left side, you have the duplexes that
Yes.
are one story.
Yes.
On the right side, you have a two-story building,
Yes.
and then you have the one-story duplex,
Yes.
and then you have the two-story building again.
Yes.
Okay, so on the right side, where you have the one story being flanked by the two-story buildings,
Yes.
you could have the two-story next to each other, and then the one-story duplex be on the right side of the paseo, creating a low-scale bookend to this paseo.
Yes. But what that does is on either side of the paseo are all plants 1 and 2. They're all single-story units. We think that right now, on either side of the paseo, you have plants 1 and 2 on the left, plants 3 and 4 on the right. You have 4 different plants, 3 elevations each. You have 12 elevation variations to address this long pedestrian paseo, all with front door architecture facing it. We think that that's a much more appealing than all you have is plan 1 and plan 2 on either side of the paseo.
Okay. So going along also with your building compositions. You have this exhibit on Plan 1C, Plan 2XC, 2XC, and Plan 1C.
Package you're referring to?
Yeah, it starts with that as your top page.
Approximately what page is it?
It doesn't say. Like middle of the page. If you click on the thumb, yeah, left, yeah, right there. What top? One top. Those are all the pages, right? So you can travel through there. See it?
All the elevations. Okay, so she's looking at the elevation sheet. Yep, there you go. Yep.
That plan 2XC.
Plan 2XC.
And it's right next to Plan 1C. There you go.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So tell me about your location of your control joint or expansion joints.
Okay.
And how does that come together with this simple modern design that you're trying to create?
Expansion joints are now required by code, so to prevent stucco from cracking.
They're all, okay.
So for any stucco building nowadays being constructed, the expansion joints are there. And rather than having some randomly placed stucco joints, we are proposing for example, on Plan 1C, at the center line of the garage door opening, we're proposing a vertical expansion joints. And then because of the width and the dimension of this, the wall above the garage door, we need another horizontal expansion joint. So these expansion joints are placed strategically while meeting code and also for aesthetic reasons.
Okay. But right now you have a very sort of rectangular or horizontal design, and then you're introducing these sort of, you're splitting the garage in half, which is more of a rectangular design. And so it seems odd that you were to split it like right in the middle of the garage.
Yeah.
The other observation I have is that this particular design, because it's a duplex and because of where it's located, the variation from on the left side and the variation on the right is not significant enough to make it seem like it's a complete different building. So why not replicate both sides to be the same so it has more of a stronger presence of a symmetrical design?
We're trying to stay away from the symmetrical design. We're trying to provide some variation in the overall building massing, even though they're single-story units.
But your variation is 2 feet. Your variation is not having an eyebrow. Your variations are not significant enough to make it seem like they're 2 separate homes that are sharing a wall.
Okay. It's a little misleading for for two-dimensional plans. If I may go back to it, the 3-dimensional renderings, I think it's more telling. Brad, can you help me with it? It's in the other PDF.
The other presentation? Or?
Yeah, it's in the other presentation. Great. So as you can see, this is the road of the duplex, the single-story duplexes that it's in question. I think that one would not be, the intent is not to make these duplexes identical in building massing. In fact, there are subtle variations between the A, B, and C elevation for the same plan. There are also variations within that. We're trying to avoid the same look from the outside for the same plan. That's why we have an A, B, and C elevation. So we're trying to introduce as many variations as possible to address a very rich street scene.
Okay. Okay, any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you very much. All right, I'd like to start the discussion with Member Sean.
On some of the elevations, it looks like there's a fair amount of mixing up of the materials. And then I think on some, as you're pointing out, and we're in discussion with, it looks a little bland. And that would be my comment, that I think, and when I say mixing up the materials, well, not just the colors and the depth, I think actually looks pretty good on most of what I'm seeing here. I think it's where I see some actual alternate materials like concrete panels and things like that. I see block called out, however, I don't see that much on the elevations, but I think it would be nice to, if you guys were open to spreading out those materials a bit more in some of the other, like the duplexes that you pointed out that I mentioned look a bit bland. I think that's where you're starting. We're going pretty well with that. I'm not sure what to do about the pool thing. I think that's it's a nice to have, but I don't know that it's a mandatory. The density, this project looks fairly dense to me, but I feel like we're kind of maybe beyond that stage now in this.
Okay, Member John.
I'll stick to landscape. I think the general it's gonna be windy. It's a tough place to plant, but I think the selections should make it out there. This is too micro at this point, but fire is probably not. It's for a social gathering focal point, this type of environment. I hope there's, I like that you've stepped up towards some of the shade structures and things. I hope that thought process is kept as things progress. Some of the distances of walking between things, it looks like you're trying to achieve social spaces with the parks and things. I hope there's along the way some small gathering points and things.
Thank you, John. Member Tom?
Yeah, a number of things. First of all, the shade structures that the council or the planning commission asked for. It seems to me that your shade structures are basically just something you walk under to get into the paseo. I think a shade structure should be a structure that's pulled away from the circulation so that people can sit under it and gather and have a social interaction instead of just kind of defining this is the front gate and the entry to the paseo. My biggest challenge is that everything is so linear here. We have an entire north to south row of two-story houses, another north to south row of two houses, another north to south row of two houses, and then north to south row of one-story houses. It seems like it would be much more appealing if the one-stories and two-stories were mixed together in those long rows going north to south. Also, I count 7 different pedestrian walkways that run north to south through this project and on the 2 sides of this project, which is great to make the walkways convenient, but it sure puts down a lot of hardscape that's repeating itself. But my biggest challenge is with the paseo. I cannot totally understand the general concept of it's the spine of the community, but to me what it does is it really makes all of the access through the community totally blocked off. All of these streets that dead end at the paseo will function very difficultly because if I'm a trash collector, I have to come up this street and then back my truck back down the street with almost a blind corner backing into the loop road. It seems like that access is just a recipe for disaster. Also, I live in a community like this, and there's a lot of weekenders. If trash pickup day is a Tuesday, they'll put their bins out on the street on Sunday night. The trash is picked up Tuesday, and the bins probably won't go back into their yard until they get home on Friday. So I think the concept of individual bins, when the site is so tight, again, is going to make an unsightly collection of bins, some in, some out, but I really worry more about the access of these trucks not being able to have a through street to move through the project. I understand the concept of the swim center at the what you're calling the amenity center. I just think people here are so used to having the opportunity to have their own pool. Certainly some of the houses on the bottom and the edges do have bigger yards where they could have a small water feature, but I think most of them, a 6-foot by 6-foot jacuzzi is probably all you can get in those spaces. So I just think it's too linear. If you look along the paseo, that row of palm trees is so unappealing to me. It's just this solid, long length with nothing kind of connecting the two sides. So I just think it's way too rigid, and obviously the rigidity, a lot of the rigidity came by needing to create this density. And I think that a lot of developers, their goal is to get as much density as they can, but I think the plan is suffering because of that density.
Member Steve.
I agree. That's going to be a whole lot of backup beeping through that entire complex. Okay, so from an overall planning perspective, one of the things I would really like to see is a closer connection between this the Paseo and the clubhouse. It sort of feels like it was an afterthought in terms of sort of coming at the end of the Paseo, then you have to walk down the street and then sort of turn around. So I would look at maybe scooting down the single families and having 547 become more of a formal link between the complex and the clubhouse area. So it feels more sort of integrated with that. Maria's comment on the two-story on the Paseo, I was looking at the section and the plans, and actually from the den of the two-story, you can look directly into the master bedroom, or bedroom 2 of the one-story. So I think there might be a sightline issue there in the design. The other thing I was concerned about was the two-story on the west side of the Paseo will potentially block the view of the mountain, which is one of our best amenities here. So thinking about how that impacts the Paseo, I think, is important. And then finally, I think, as you mentioned, trash enclosures. So as I'm looking on the plan, I don't really see anywhere for trash enclosures to go. So what I'd hate to see is people just having their cans on the side of the house. So I think some accommodation for trash enclosures so that people can conceal the cans would be important. That's fine.
Member Kenny.
And to not have to rely on putting them in your garage, because those are big bins, and the garages are probably whatever size you can get in there, and the bins will take up one car space, no matter how you slice it. All excellent comments. I found myself looking at the properties on the lower left and lower right corners and thinking that's the only units that I would want to live in. And all of my fellow committee members have just given you all the exact reasons why. I would want something that had a little variation. It was a little off the straight line grid. And I would want a large enough outdoor space where I could put a swimming pool or a plunge pool or a spa or something like that and not have it take up my entire patio. In trying to figure out how you might resolve that, I absolutely love that we have these giant groves, and of course living along the grove, facing west towards the mountain would be pretty magical. And I find myself wondering, I don't know what your constraints are on the amount of space that this has to fit into, but is there a way to provide some variation in the shape of the U that we're looking at so that some of the units push out into the grove a little bit, almost forming a zigzag of units down the sides, sort of like you've done down at the bottom of the U. That I think might, push out a little bit into the groves, you might have the room in the middle of the U to do something a little more in line with what my fellow members have suggested. So those were my observations.
Member Kenny? I think in addition to the comments that were made, the fact that it's such an orthogonal street, like if you see almost the edge of the grove of olive trees on the right side, it almost has like this natural curve that instead of giving that land to the side yards of the last row of homes, the street itself can curve and create more of a mystery and less of a sort of a bowling alley creation, so that there could be more interest on where the edge of the homes could be located. I think it's a gorgeous project. I think there's just so many wonderful things going on, and this is really the first housing block that is coming together. And I think that the variation, to be so repetitive and orthogonal may work, but there's not enough details also to make it work. So, for example, you have pavers on crosswalks, but you don't have pavers on the motor courts. And details like that is going to, I think it's going to cheapen out the density that this is creating. So I think there's potential for more via the context of composition of buildings, how the roads are designed, how that sort of jewel of a walkway that is being created. I think there's composition opportunity here that are being missed. I think it's all there, but I think it has to be reworked. Any additional comments? So, is there a pre-motion that I would like to put together? Member Tom.
Not quite ready for pre-motion, but just another clarification. Am I correct in saying there's really no reason for us to comment on the architecture because another architect is going to be bringing the actual architecture to us later?
No, we have to comment on the architecture.
Even though it's just kind of...
It's schematic at this stage, but I think it would be helpful to have you comment on the architecture as to give direction to the applicant and also to the Planning Commission as part of your recommendations.
Because I would take it that another firm or their same firm who may be doing the work will take those plans and then will use that as their guiding point to the design. And if anything varies drastically from that, they will have to come back to this board to have that reviewed again. So comments on the architecture, I believe, is just as important. And having said that, is that I understand the issue about the control joint and the requirements for cracking, but I think it could also be looked at again because some of the placements are not per where the composition is lending itself. Sometimes it's in the middle, sometimes it's on the side, sometimes it's just horizontal. It's just a little bit everywhere.
May I make a comment then about the architecture?
Sure.
Because I only talked about the site plan. I think the general style is very appropriate for the desert. I think the flat roofs and the massing is nice. I think the windows are too flat to the faces of the walls. If they could be indented and recessed in some of the windows so we get a little play and shadow lines on the buildings. The approach to the front door on a lot of these seems kind of invisible, and I think it's nicer when you know when you're standing in the street, that's where I need to go to get into this unit. Certainly along most of these streets, it's a challenge that we have on many of these tightly built projects. There's a larger percentage of garage door than there is a percentage of building, and it gets to be very, it takes away the opportunity to make the streetscape attractive. And I think part of that, again, is by having everything right in a shotgun straight row. If the fronts of the houses were to move in and out, I think it would break up that monotony of just a row of garage doors.
Member Sean, do you have comments on the architecture?
I'll agree with the window comment, the windows and doors, if there can be some added depth, if it's a takeaway that you guys might be able to do something about the materials that we talked about earlier. In addition, the site materials had been, I think one of the most poignant things I heard Maria say earlier that I'd like to just reiterate for you guys is, at least the way I heard it, I feel like the strongest part about this great project are the olive trees and the groves themselves. And after hearing what we're hearing here today with my colleagues, I think that it's starting to feel a bit like this condo section has turned its back on that core concept of the project a bit. It's feeling like, as I look at the plan now, over and over again, I really want to reach out and touch that or commingle with that concept for the project that I'm not really getting here with this design or this layout. And so I think if we could bring that back and really make that a bit stronger, that might be helpful, including with materials of the hardscape, and not to have gray concrete or all gray concrete, and maybe mixing up the materials of the hardscape with pavers, exposed aggregate, just alternate materials that really blend in with that landscape and really invite that grove area into, just to intermingle and intersperse between the architecture would seem like that may help.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
To piggyback onto the comments on the windows, I was also noticing that there were places where the windows, especially on the elevations of the two-story units, there were places where the windows looked like they could have just been, they should have been nudged a little to the left or the right to have them line up, particularly the second-story windows, line up with what's happening on the first floor. I could see where they were positioned equidistant on either side of an expansion joint, or cutting the entire length into thirds, but then they weren't lining up well with what was happening on the first floor. Noticed that, but I didn't comment because I wasn't sure if we were going too far into it. I'll just add that to the comments already made.
Member John.
With what Sean was saying about the groves and any about the quantity of space, there is so much land out there that this shotgun center does feel a little constricted. I think it's a good layout. I think it will be a very nice community. The idea of a plunge pool or something small within, for owners that have the space to make that decision is fine. But with the tightness there, when you start adding motors and equipment, the sound ricocheting in amongst the buildings could potentially become issues for neighbors. The linear, reiterate what I said before about the shade structures and smaller gathering spaces. With the linear, I just want to make sure you don't feel like you have to keep moving through or you're disturbing somebody because you stopped near their house. Some kind of, those smaller, more intimate spaces that are meant to draw people, I think could be accentuated a bit more stronger emphasis on some of those potentially.
I think the idea of having each home of the opportunity of the pool, I'm not so sure on that concept because of how much they're investing in this community spa / restaurant / yoga class. I mean, this place sounds tremendous, and so all the housing development that's around it is to create the audience and the population to make sure that that community building gets attended and used. And so I see that concept, and it would be interesting, this being one of them where it doesn't have a pool, if it will be now more of a communal use where people will gather in there. And I'd like to see the applicant try that concept and then see how that plays out here in Palm Springs. So I'm not so much in agreement of trying to now try to squeeze in, because you're right, the motors, the enclosure, the fencing, all of that is going to come in play, and it's going to start eating away the spaces that is being created here. So I think we have said quite a bit of what our observations are. I think overall we feel like this is an amazing project. And I think it has quite a bit of molding that needs to be done so that it flows a little bit better and not so forced. And I think all those comments are based on how human, walk from one place to another. How do they drive? And this idea that if you look at some straight street, all you're going to do is speed up. So what are the things that are going to be traffic calming and composition to the street? So I believe that the applicant needs to come back with a revised concept. So that's the opinion that is being put in front of you guys.
Madam Chair, if I can just briefly interject here. There were a couple of comments made relative to pushing out into the Grove and reconfiguring the access to the community center. I just want you all to be aware that, number one, the map has already been recorded for this subdivision, and so they don't have the ability to move lots, unfortunately. So they must work within the existing framework that they have. Also, looking at the Groves, they have a property line there. They are required to adhere to the R3 standards in terms of setbacks. Now, we've tried to interpret that as flexibly as we can, but there's a limitation in terms of how much that they can push out to the Groves. So I just wanted you to be aware of those facts as you're formulating your recommendations to the applicant on those particular issues. One thing that I don't typically do is try and direct your comments, but I will say one thing about the swimming pool and the community center. One of the things that we would like to encourage in these types of developments is to get people out of the pod and to have the neighbors actually mix with one another. And so encouraging pedestrian activity, and particularly in this case where they have such a wonderful clubhouse facility, we would really like to encourage the residents from this multifamily development to walk to or bicycle to the clubhouse and use those facilities. So I'm a little bit less concerned with having a community pool within this multifamily development, or having the individual plunge pools, I think is acceptable. But we do want to encourage residents of this overall master plan community to get out and use the sidewalks and the paths and the bicycle lanes and things like that, and to use the clubhouse facilities. So I'll leave that editorial comment to the side. But again, on the issues of the subdivision, we're kind of constrained within the boundaries that we have within the recorded map.
In the clarification is that the recorded map says that every single lot that they have already subdivided is in place. So in other words, the two streets, the U-shaped street.
The U-shaped street is not, and actually it's a U-shaped driveway, not a street. But in terms of the location of the single-family lots and the exterior boundaries of the multifamily parcel, those are set by the map.
Right. And I believe that what we're suggesting is not to go into the Grove, but to use the edges to perhaps tilt a little, spin a little, angle a little, so that they can break away from the orthogonal design.
Yeah, and certainly that would be permissible.
Thank you. Thank you, Flynn.
So if we need a motion, then it sounds like the motion would be to continue this item and have it come back with some appropriate modifications based on all the comments and input that we've given.
Do we need to list them again, or you're good?
No, again, just as with one of the previous, we will transcribe these comments and provide them to the applicant.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I will second that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you.
And just a note to the applicant, if we could sit down together and go through these comments, I think that would be helpful before we come back to the AAC.
Thank you very much. Okay, committee member comments. I know there's one for sure.
Yes, I did have one.
Member Kenny.
One question is if anybody knows what happened to the Welcome to Palm Springs sign on Indian Canyon as you enter Palm Springs. It's not there.
At Palm Canyon.
As you come in from the 10 freeway on Indian Canyon, the Welcome to Palm Springs sign, the vintage looking one, the last time I went by, unless I just had a complete brain stall, isn't there.
Use that road.
It's a green background with the white lettering and script. Maybe I had a...
What have you done?
I will apologize. I haven't noticed that or heard discussions about that.
No?
So I will check into that and let you know what I find
Now I
out.
feel like I need to drive back and make sure I didn't miss it. But I was coming in with someone in the car and about to point it out, and it wasn't there. And I thought, are they taking it down to replace it with one of the more modern versions, or what's happening? And I was surprised I didn't know about that.
Well, our director is not aware, so.
Okay, maybe I'll do another drive-by and make sure I didn't miss it. I'll let you know if it's something other than what I just said.
Member Sean, did you have a comment also?
Just the same thing. It's been a while now, Flynn, that we've been looking at the lots of landscape plans that come across the boards here, and oftentimes they don't show windows or doors or anything, and it makes me really doubt whether they've really given consideration or thought to what's in those interior spaces. And we've brought it up so many times here at the committee that I wonder if it's something easy to just some level of rejection if they haven't included those. I know you said you'd get to that at staff, but it'd be nice to kind of try to be a little tougher on that one.
Yeah, what we might do is, because this has been brought up a couple of times, is to modify our design guidelines that we make available to applicants. We don't talk about that in our design guidelines currently, and I think we probably need to add that there so that they understand that they need to consider that as they're doing the placement and selection of materials.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be nice to have the, because they partialize the plan to make it simple, but then what happens is we can't see the context.
Yeah.
So I know we're supposed to drive by and look at it and so on and Google Earth and stuff, but sometimes it makes it hard when it is partialized. And is it really a street, or is it a driveway, or is there an alleyway? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I wanted to, I think I know the answer, but when the applicants say that they haven't had the chance to look at the staff report, when the agenda goes out to all of us, including the posting of the agenda, that means that the applicant could very well go into the website and check out what the staff report is.
The applicants receive a link to the agenda and the staff report, so they have it available. I will have my staff follow up so that the applicant realizes they need to review that before they come to the meeting. Because as you've heard today, it sounds like some of them have not done that.
Right.
Most of our more experienced applicants will do that. But some of our landscape companies, unfortunately, as you've seen here today, are not familiar with the entitlement process or the fact that staff reports are generated with conditions of approval. So I'll have my staff work with them on that.
Yeah, the staff is tremendous. They review and they make it so thorough for us, and it would really save them time also to look at it. Yeah. Okay. Director, do you have any comments for us?
I don't have any comments. Again, we appreciate your service here on the committee. And one of the things I would mention, if you are going to miss a meeting, if you could let us know as soon as possible so that we can invite Sheila or Steve to attend. Thankfully, I got a last-minute email from Mr. Rotman saying that he wouldn't be able to attend, and Steve was able to turn around in a matter of minutes and say, yes, I can be here on Monday afternoon, after I emailed him this morning. So I do appreciate you being available, but again, that's not always possible. So if you can just give us as much notice as possible when you can't be here at one of the meetings, so that way we give Sheila and Steve some time to be able to work it into their schedule, that would be appreciated. So. and that's also helpful too.
Yeah.
So
Oh.
again, thank you.
Thank you, Flynn, and it's 5:34, and we're adjourned.